So, all this month I've been speaking about vulnerability, and I told you that this Sunday, what I was going to do was take a look at questions from you. Questions about things that you want to know more about in the science of mind, or just general questions, and I got some really interesting ones. So I'm going to look and see what time it is. I'm going to try and keep this lasered and still respond to as many questions as I can. And I did spend some time looking up quotes from Ernest Holmes that I might throw in from time to time to respond to some of these things. I want to draw your attention to this altar over here that was put together by Karen Frost and Heather Moore, and also Laurel, although she doesn't realize it, Laurel Wilson, because they were in Foundations class with me, and this was Heather's project. This painting was Heather's project for Foundations class. And then at the end of class, Laurel, who was our practitioner in class, made little wisdom cards for everybody with the qualities of God. So we have those down below in the rainbow colors, because today is Pride Day. This is the end of Pride Month. So happy Pride, everybody. And I do want to let you know there are M&Ms up here for just about everybody. There are every kind you can imagine. Caramel, milk chocolate, peanut M&Ms. What's the other kind? What is it? Peanut butter. And then there are M&M cookies that are plain and peanut butter, but the M&Ms are plain in both those. And there are also many sources of wisdom up here, which hopefully will infuse me this morning as I speak to you. So I want to thank you all, especially Karen and Heather, for sharing this great stuff with us this morning. Got the rainbow flag up in the back as well. And by the way, if you're here for the very first time this morning, I just want you to know you're so welcome here, wherever you may be on your pathway of faith. We're delighted that you're with us. And this is a little unusual today, what I'm doing, but I hope that you'll find something of benefit for you in it. So we're just going to give ourselves a peaceful background for this. And these are not in any particular order. One was, why meditate? I can't think of anywhere in the literature that Holmes writes or talks about it. Now, this was what Holmes said, one of the things that he said about meditation. He says, if we find ourselves surrounded by confusion, we should meditate on peace until we feel a sense of peace. And then, as the mind returns to its objective state, it brings an atmosphere of peace with it, which dispels the confusion just as light dispels the darkness. Thus, our meditation becomes a practical thing. It has an actual value in everyday experience. I believe that wherever we see references to meditation in Ernest Holmes' works, he's talking about a very specific kind of meditation. So he's not referring to Vipassana meditation. He's not referring to mantra meditation. He's not referring to walking meditation or eating meditation. He's referring to contemplative meditation, which has a long history in the Christian tradition. It's where you take a particular word or concept and you allow it to permeate you and to turn it in your mind. So it is not a thought-free kind of meditation like you might be thinking about. And I think it's important for us to recognize that as we talk about and teach meditation in the science of mind, we explore all of the different kinds, because if you are an active person, Vipassana meditation, which is following the breath, or mantra meditation, which is focusing on a single word or phrase, may be not suitable for you. A walking meditation or an eating meditation might be better to do an active meditation. So if you have trouble just sitting, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, okay? So I think sometimes people think, well, I can't clear my mind. Hello. For those of us whose minds just talk on and on, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It's the idea of noticing that and just letting it go. You know, if it chatters away in the background, who cares? We just shift our attention. Deepak Chopra said once, and I love this about meditation, he said, you know how there's sometimes a pause, just a little pause between thoughts in your mind? Does that sound familiar? A little pause? Just make the pause longer. That was his definition of meditation. Just make the pause a little longer. So, and you don't have to do it for a long time. So why do we do meditation? We do it because it allows us to withdraw from the conditions of life and bring ourselves back to the spiritual truth that we know. And very often in life we need those grounding times, don't we? Because otherwise we get lost in the day's conditions or demands. So that's one reason to do it. This is a great question. Explain subjectivity and subjective mind as Ernest Holmes uses them. Hard to understand. Is it subconscious? In a word, yes. Yes. Now, there's a very specific reason why Ernest Holmes didn't use the word subconscious. It's because that was not a familiar term in the early part of the 20th century when he was speaking and teaching in the 1920s. And he didn't want people to confuse it with unconscious, meaning out cold, no awareness, nothing, nada. What he meant was that part of mind which operates without our direct awareness, like digesting your food, blinking your eyes, sending nerve signals. It does millions of things we could never do just with the conscious mind trying to run it. So he spoke about objective, being the conscious mind, and subjective, meaning the subconscious mind. And the reason he used those terms is because hypnosis was brand new at the turn of the 20th century, in the early part of the century. And what they were discovering was that there's a part of people's minds that could be subject to somebody else's mind, to somebody else's direction, when in a certain state. And so he was trying to teach us how to be the person that programs that subjective mind, that is subjective to the conscious ideas and thoughts. So objective was that which was choosing, aware, had volition and direction, and subjective was that which was directed by it. Does that make sense? Now, he also talked, I didn't see too many nods out there. Did that make some sense? Yes? Okay. So he also talked about a collective consciousness, the subjective mind as a collective consciousness, kind of like Jung's collective unconscious, because that was the way in which Jung was referring to the unconscious, was as that subconscious part of us. And I think it's also partly important to remember that just because we have a subjective or subconscious mind doesn't mean that everything that we do consciously takes effect in that subjective mind. Because what takes effect in our subconscious and then works its way into our lives is what we believe and repeat. What we believe and repeat and repeat and repeat. And if we believe and repeat it with emotion, that subjective doesn't know if you're being sarcastic. It just gets the feeling, tone, and the substance of the message and says, yes. So you might watch it if you're really pessimistically sarcastic and a lot of junk starts showing up in your life. Oops. The subjective doesn't necessarily recognize that you're kidding. There's more about this later. Okay, here's another one. Holmes says, my thought, which is the key to my life, opens all doors for me. And this one says, my question is, what about the words and the language we use? Negative words can cancel positive words. Yeah, they can. They can neutralize each other. Because what are we repeating? You know, we think sometimes that when we do our prayer work, we're putting that into consciousness and we're opening up to the result of that. But if we go around and contradict what we're cultivating in our belief system all day long in our conversations, we're definitely putting that into the subconscious mind or into that creative law, more so than the prayer we did for 10 minutes that morning. So our life and the way that we speak, not just how we think, but the way that we speak, coupled with our emotions and how we think, is more the prayer, a lot of times, than the prayer. Because the subjective isn't only tuned in when we're being good. The subconscious, the creative law part of all of us, is not only listening when we're at our best, it just listens all the time because it doesn't have any sorting factor to it at all. It has no will of its own whatsoever. It just listens and then does. And it predominantly does what we predominantly are speaking and believing and thinking about and repeating with emotion. Are you with me here so far? Okay. And so, yeah, our words often reflect our true beliefs. And when they come out, especially in unguarded moments and sort of automatic statements, those beliefs are the real thoughts that we're building our reality on. So when we listen to ourselves talk, sometimes we can catch ourselves and go, you know, is that how I want it to be? Is that what I want to claim for my life? So clearly it's what I believe. How well is that serving me to hang on to that belief? Good question. Then I have a couple that have to do with conditions that persist even though you've been praying about them for a long time. What does one do if the mental or physical condition persists after multiple treatments? And here's a personal one. What would a deep, long-lived desire from a true place within, why would that never manifest and leave me with a sense of disappointment my whole life? Prayed and prayed and prayed to be relieved of this disappointment. And I want to share a couple things that Ernest Holmes said about this, because practitioners throughout the movement are often of two minds about whether you pray more than once about something, because we always say that a treatment is always effective, that once it's prayed, it's done, and yet we don't always see the results right away. And so what do? So Ernest Holmes said this, first in Creative Mind, second in The Science of Mind. In Creative Mind, one treatment would heal anything if it were not for the fact that people are constantly receiving false suggestions from outer life. As it now stands, we should treat until we get results, always expecting that it will happen at once. So every time we let it go, we believe that's accomplished and we're ready to accept it. The next time we do it like we haven't done it before, and we believe it will be accomplished. Every treatment should be complete, and at the close, we should always realize that it is done. Easier said than done, right? And then in The Science of Mind, he says, one should treat any given proposition until he proves his principle. Now, I know he says he, him, his a lot. That's because when you're writing in the 1920s, that was generic. We know that's not generic now, but it was then. One should treat any given proposition until he proves his principle, no matter how long it takes. We should treat until we get results, until there comes into our objective experience the actual outpouring of our subjective words. And I'll give you an example. He said he was having a conversation, or he was in a meeting or something once with a bunch of practitioners, and one of them said, well, I only ever treat once for anything, because I know that it's accomplished, it's done. So I let it go, I never repeat it again. And Holmes said, well, he said, you know, I have a client I've been treating for. I've been treating him for about a year, and I think he's a little worse. Would you speak the word for him? So, what I would say about that is, if we've been treating for something, if we've been praying for something for quite a while, and we have not seen a result, I would say, then something is blocking our experience of what we're looking for. And maybe the treatment we need to be doing is to have that become visible to us so that we can deal with it. I would also probably ask myself, what am I not willing to let go of that might be related to this? What am I not willing to ask for? What am I not willing to let in? What am I resisting around this? And I want to also say that there are times in our lives where situations and circumstances happen to us, and we try very hard to change them, both in the outer and in the inner, and they don't change. Now, when those things happen, I think about it this way. I once had a guy in my church in Huntington Beach say to me, well, you know, there are limitations to treatment. You know, I mean, if I could, I would like to treat to be taller and have my hair back, but that's not likely to happen. And So the way that I think about it is like this. I believe that theoretically, everything is possible in treatment if we have the conviction, the endurance, the commitment, and the focus to continue to release and accept on that change, even when it means we're moving against the tide of the belief system of all of humanity. And that's not easy. And sometimes it may not be worth your time and energy to do that. Somebody asked Ernest Holmes once, if this works, why do you wear glasses? He said, because I can't see a damn thing without them. And I think what he meant by that, if I could, and I'm projecting this onto him clearly, but at what time would it take him to undo the human consciousness in his mind about nearsightedness? Maybe his time wasn't worth that when he could just put glasses on. Do you know what I mean? And another piece to that for me is sometimes we don't see the whole picture of what's going on because we are human beings living a lifespan that's kind of short in terms of eternity. Would you agree? And I don't necessarily know, me, Mary, personally as a human being embodied in this spacesuit, I don't necessarily personally know what this soul that became Mary was trying to learn or grow into. I don't know that for sure. And I'm sure that if Mary could look at that soul's choices coming in, she would say, are you kidding? I don't want to do that. So I think that there is a larger context sometimes for the work that we take on in our lives. And sometimes it means that what we want to do in circumstances where we're disappointed or something's very hard or it doesn't seem to change or we don't know, we've done what we know how to do and it doesn't seem to change, to say, what is this bringing forth? What quality is this bringing forth in me? What am I breaking open into? The seed has to be broken open, as Khalil Gibran says, so that its heart can stand in the sun. So what is being presented to us or offered to us? I have said before, and I'll tell you probably many times in the future, I have visited people in the hospital, and whereas a superficial version of science of mind might say, well, there's something wrong with their consciousness or they wouldn't be sick. That's a wrong thinking, a wrong belief system. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that I sometimes see that somebody who's in the hospital, that experience of them being in the hospital becomes a linchpin that heals their whole family in all kinds of relationship and consciousness ways that might not ever come about if that soul hadn't taken on that particular piece of work to serve them all. See, so now, that might be a rationalization. If it is, I'm okay with that. It works for me. So I also want to say, because I didn't say this at the beginning, these things are just my opinions, my feelings, what works for me and my understanding of science of mind. That does not mean it has to be yours or that it will work for you. But I'm offering it, and you can turn it over in your mind and see what you think. Is it best to have the permission of the person for whom the prayer is being done? On our prayer request cards, it says, if you're asking for treatment for somebody else, is it okay with them? And the person says, for instance, my son, who's diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. So here's what I would say about that. You can always do treatment for a child who is, a child. You can always do treatment for a pet. You can always do treatment for a person who is unconscious or unable to give their acceptance or permission. But you can't use treatment to force somebody else to be what you think they ought to be or what you decide they would be happier being. It's coercive. It's inappropriate. And the person, if they're not prepared to accept the result of that prayer, it won't work for them anyway. The prayed for result will hover, this is how I think of it, will hover nearby so that if their acceptance ever opens, that treatment would automatically manifest itself. But until they can welcome it, it's not really appropriate to do that. Now, one exception to that, I would say, other than the ones I mentioned, is I believe you can always treat for the highest and best for someone. Not necessarily assuming that you know what that is, all right? So you can always do prayer for somebody's highest and best and let it go at that, knowing that the infinite knows what that is and creative law can act upon highest and best, even if your idea of it limits that person or isn't right for them. Sometimes people say to me, and this used to happen a lot more some decades ago, people would come to me and say, my relatives are praying for me because they think I'm in a cult. What do I tell them? What do I do? And I would say, thank them. Their prayers cannot hurt you. They pray out of love for you. So ask them to pray for your wisdom, for your deepest connection to God, for your guidance to the light, to the truth, and thank them for doing that for you. And they can word it however they think it's best for you, but you're open to receiving the highest and best. So whatever love is taken out of the prayer they prayed for you, you get the highest and best of that. Does that make sense? Yes? Are you still with me here, or am I putting you to sleep? Okay. I need support, this one says, for staying solidly in my center and my light while in partnership with a challenging personality. When I was a member of the church in Seattle, before I was ever a minister, there was a woman in the church who had had a profound near-death experience. She had been preparing to study to be a minister, or maybe she was already in classes, I can't remember. And she had severe heart problems and had to have open heart surgery. And the heart was so swollen, when they opened her up, they actually had to stab it to release the blood pressure and some other stuff that was in there. And in that moment, she died. She left her body. She went up to the top of the operating room. She watched what they were doing. She went to the waiting room. She heard what they were saying about her. She heard what the surgeons and nurses were saying. And she was gone for a while. She even met somebody she knew up there who wasn't dead as far as she knew. And then she understood somehow that she had a choice about whether or not to come back. And if she came back, she chose to do that, it would be painful. It would be difficult to come back. And that her job would be to teach unconditional love. Well, Betty decided to come back, and it was very painful in the physical body to come back in. Interestingly, though, there was a certain amount of change in Betty's brain because of the time she was without oxygen. So she had aphasia, which sometimes meant she couldn't get the right word, and also sometimes meant that she didn't remember, this wasn't aphasia, but memory, she didn't remember when something was a secret. So her granddaughter, who used to babysit for me, said, we never tell Grandma when we're having a surprise party for somebody because she'd tell them. And the thing about Betty was that she exuded love. She was completely unflappable. Nothing ever upset her or hurt her or worried her. Nothing. And she was married to a very mean old man who was not kind at all to anybody. And as Chrissy, her granddaughter, would say to me, she'd be talking to me about prayer and about God, and Grandpa would say, oh, Betty, don't tell her all that crap. And she said, and Grandma would just look at him with so much love, and then she'd go right on. Nothing ever was disturbing to her. And I think it was because Betty knew who she was, and she knew who he was. And so she didn't take his pain seriously when he was difficult and irascible or even verbally unkind. She just didn't take it in, so it didn't hurt her. So when we're hurt by somebody else, I think it's important to ask ourselves, what do I believe about me? What do I believe about what this person is saying to me? What do I believe it means? Do I feel attacked and I feel like I need to defend myself? What is going on that their pain is resonating in me, that it's reflecting in me and I'm responsive to it? Now, I would throw a few caveats in here. If the hurt from this difficult person is physical, I would say leave. If the hurt is psychological or emotional, I would say get support. Get support. Get a practitioner, get a therapist, get support. If it's financial, get a counselor or an attorney. If it is about the relationship, and that's difficult, remember that it's okay for you to set new boundaries. It's okay when somebody's speaking to you in a way that is abusive or inappropriate to just get up and leave. And if that would endanger your life, that's a clue that you should be planning to leave. This is just my opinion. Please know that. But this was the question, so this is what I would say. Try to recenter without trying to fix the other person. Give yourself words of encouragement. Get the nourishing thoughts and carry that around with you so you can refer to it to bring yourself back. Change your responses to them. Say, you might be right. That could give them a moment to breathe and pause. That's sure not what they're expecting. And take a break. And pray for harmony between you in the highest and best ways. You know, sometimes what happens in that situation is you pray somebody right out of your life. You pray for their highest and best and your highest and best, and the next thing you know, they get transferred. Or they leave you, or they quit, or whatever it is, or they fire you, or, you know, and somehow you're out of the situation. Anybody ever had anything like that happen to them? Yeah. Can you talk about suffering in the best sense of the word and how science of mind acknowledges or offers ways to process suffering? For example, having to go down to come up. And you know what Ernest Holmes says, and I have a bunch of quotes here from him, I'm not going to read them. What I'm going to say is this. What Ernest Holmes says is that because we're in the human condition, all of us together, all of us as different unique manifestations of the divine, we encounter one another in such a way that sometimes it causes challenges and difficulties and friction. And those are the ways in which we discover what's true and who we are. That is how we grow and evolve. If we lived in a universe in which everything was done for us, we would not evolve because there'd be no need. We would stay the same. But in order to grow, to experience, to taste, to choose, we need those opportunities to rub up against each other and to grow, to discover, to find out places inside ourselves where we're stuck, or where we need to let go, or where we need to open up and welcome in. And we don't necessarily learn those things the easy way. I mean, hopefully as we practice in the science of mind, we begin to see our lessons sooner and learn them more quickly than having the bricks fall out of the sky on us, you know? Because I always say the way the universe gets our attention that something isn't working is it always will tap us on the shoulder gently and whisper in our ear first. If we don't notice that, it will tap a little more firmly and talk a little louder. If we don't notice that, we'll get a good shaking sometimes. And the voice booms. And if we ignore that, the bricks fall out of the sky. You know, it's when the soul needs to grow, it needs to grow. Now, you can still ignore it, even when the bricks fall out of the sky. Anybody ever done that? I have. We talk ourselves out of it. Nah, you know, it doesn't mean that. Well, maybe it does. Maybe the universe is trying to get our attention. Maybe it's trying to show us that what we're asking for in prayer, if we don't learn this lesson, we can't make space for that, and we don't know it yet. So the universe is showing us the way through. Sometimes the way through seems very narrow and small, and we have to crawl through to get there. But if we persist, we come into a greater freedom, a larger light. And this, I think I will share this. Oh, wait, no, this is a different question. Okay. There is a focus on everything being possible and on abundance. So why has the congregation never been able to manifest a property of our own? Why are so many of the congregation financially challenged? And then in a similar vein of, why isn't this happening if everything is possible? In relationship with the sacred and beloved, how do I transform that into my everyday relationships, and especially to the main relationship of one special partner? And I want to read this from Living Without Fear by Ernest Holmes. When we speak of using spiritual mind treatment for correcting undesirable conditions, or even for opening up to greater ones, I would say, we're not suggesting that any mental or spiritual conjuring trick is involved, nor is the hope being held out that anyone, through imagination, will, or concentration, can bring into his experience that which is unlike himself. For instance, a man who knows nothing about music would be wasting his time visualizing himself as a grand opera singer. We must never forget that in dealing with spiritual and physical laws, any energy must conform to the instrument through which it flows. This statement in no way can be construed as contradicting the limitless possibilities of life, nor the potential possibilities of man. But it is evident that whatever the law does for us must be done through us. Hence, it is necessary that we furnish adequate channels as well as being receptive to it. And when he's talking about adequate channels, he's not just talking about fundraising. He's talking about becoming the active vehicle of acceptance for that and embodiment of it. And that is a big piece of work for something that hasn't shown up in our lives yet. And so we need to ask ourselves, I think, how can I see this differently, this situation? How can I see the current situation as a blessing so that I can open to the greater? How can I open myself more and become more of what it is I want to experience? If I become more of what it is I want to experience, then I almost don't need that outward thing. But in a way, it has to come to me then because I'm a vibrational match for it. It can't resist me. We're the same thing. Now, that's easier to talk about than it is to do. Would you agree? I mean, as Ernest Holmes says, this philosophy is easy. I mean, it's simple, but it's not easy. So we're not saying you can have whatever you want. We're saying we have and we attract to ourselves what we become. And so the real work is to grow ourselves, The universe isn't withholding anything, and it's not reluctant, but we want to grow. And let's see. I've got other questions here, and I need to stop. So some really quick answers. Do you think the universe is an illusion as put forth in A Course in Miracles? Nope, I don't. I think, as Holmes says, it's as real as it's supposed to be. It's an expression of the divine. It might be a divine hologram, but as we're experiencing it, it is as real as it's supposed to be. Do we have angels that stay with us and keep us out of harm's way? Well, that's two questions. Do we have guardian angels or angels, and do they keep us out of harm's way? I personally believe, and Ernest Holmes said the guardian angel is really that higher consciousness within us. I grew up Catholic, so I kind of believe in stuff out of that background. Feel free to discard it. But I sort of think of it as God-realized beings in the unseen who are aware of us and look out for us. And they may whisper wisdom to us that keeps us out of harm's way, or we might ignore it. So it's kind of up to us. They don't do all that for us. Do you believe in reincarnation? Personally, I do. Ernest Holmes did not. And he didn't care whether we did or not. It didn't bother him one way or the other. Are signs real as a form of destiny? Does God give us signs in life, signs that may answer questions we have in our minds? That's two questions also. Are there signs? is their destiny. I don't believe in destiny because I believe in free will and choice. So I don't believe we're destined to become something. You know, I think it was Emerson who said the only thing you're destined to be is what you decide to become. And I believe that. Do we receive signs? Yeah. I think the universe is a friendly place that's here to support us and cooperate with us. And I've experienced synchronicities in my life that I could only refer to as signs. That, once again, is just me. Feel free to take that any way you want. Explain the relationship between health, heredity, and God. Talk about how consciousness affects health or illness. And these are 3 different questions. How do I cope with witnessing sudden violent death or injury and still believe in God? You got a lot of genes in your body. And some of you have brothers and sisters, but you're not exactly the same. You inherited genes from your parents, but maybe not exactly the same selection and balance. And genes switch themselves on and off for various reasons. So, was I extremely nearsighted before I had laser surgery because I have nearsighted people in my family? Or was I nearsighted because that was a possibility, and I thought the way they thought, so I saw the way they saw? Which genes did I switch on and off? And why? And when? And do they change? They do. And why? And when? And how? I don't know the answers to those things, but I think that our heredity is not enough to explain our experience, although it's part of it. And that our consciousness affects how we think about our health and how we respond to our health. It also affects our health. But as we're experiencing challenges in health, if we are, then the way that we approach those and think about those makes a huge difference as to the impact they have on our experience of our life. Does that make sense? Likewise, when we see or witness something that's extremely traumatic and difficult, if you are a veteran and you've been in active war, if you have watched somebody die of cancer, if you experience a terrific accident where you see bodies, if you're an EMT, if you were a first responder somewhere, how do you see all that and still believe in God? Because we don't know when the time is over for somebody, how they necessarily go. We don't know what that injury or illness is about in that soul's beingness. And we can always pray for the EMTs, for the people involved, for ourselves, for our health, for somebody else's well-being, and let go of the appearance, because we are not the appearance. We're more than that. We're always more than that. And last, please share if yes. Have you had a profound experience that challenged your beliefs and made you question your ability to remain a minister? Yes. There were several times I questioned my ability to stay with Centers for Spiritual Living. And most of them had to do with the approach of some of our ministers to the LGBTQ movement and marriage equality, or what was civil marriage at the time that we didn't do, or I did, but some ministers didn't do marriages for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, whomever. And I found that hard to understand and connect my heart to that. I found it hurtful, and I couldn't justify it. And I felt like if that's how this is going to be handled, maybe I don't belong here. Maybe this isn't the right place for me. And then I had to question, what do I think about science of mind? Well, the truth of the teachings, I believe that. That's true for me. So I'm going to stay with that, whether I stay with this or not. And that challenges me sometimes, but things have shifted, and the same thing is true with racism, because so often we defend ourselves because we don't see ourselves as racist, where we're not listening to the other person saying, what you said hurts me. What you said is a reflection of something that is racist, and not to hear that. Ooh, I find that really painful. So those two areas really became challenges for me with Centers for Spiritual Living, and sometimes that crops up. I did a wedding once, years ago, and one of our ministers who was gay who was a fabulous human being, had a church down in Southern California. And this particular wedding I was doing in Napa, and I overheard a guy who was a member of that church who said, well, you know, we just found out that he's living with another man, and, you know, he's gay, and so we got rid of him. And, you know, it was a wedding. I was there to serve. I wanted to say something to him, but I didn't know how to handle my anger. And so I didn't say anything to him, but I wanted to say, excuse me, I thought you said you were a religious scientist. I was really upset. So those are some of the things that have challenged me. As far as my beliefs are concerned with Science of Mind and my old Catholic background and A Course in Miracles and all the different things that I've explored, I take what I feel is the highest and best from everything that I can. You know, and so like all of us ministers, we kind of are an amalgam of Science of Mind beliefs. Now, I want to say one last thing and I'm going to stop. And that is, when we talk about creating our own experience in our lives, I think in Science of Mind, one thing we do that we need to shift is that we focus so much on individual consciousness that we don't talk about collective consciousness. And we create collectively as powerfully as we create individually. So sometimes if you're dealing with an individual challenge, it's part of the consciousness that is larger than you. And sometimes to change it, more than just you needs to change. So I think, yes, we need to be personally accountable. Yes, we need to help one another and recognize that we have a responsibility to the larger consciousness as well as to our own. And yes, I believe in service to those who are temporarily experiencing less, whether that means their whole life or 10 minutes. So that's a whole lot of my opinion. And I'll set this aside and not do it again for a while. But I really thank you for giving me this opportunity and for asking me questions that made me think. Namaste.